Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to lecture 24. We're going to be talking about social behavior, wrapping up our discussion, continuing with altruism. We're going to talk about eusociality, a little bit, a very specific type of social behavior, and then some issues with social behavior. We've got 13 slides for you, including this first one. So here's the second slide. We had been talking about how altruism is explainable using Hamilton's rule, where you include relatedness values. So the more closely related you are to someone, the more likely you may be to act altruistically towards them. But sometimes folks have noticed that it's not always close relatives who are acting altruistically. And so folks thought of kind of another way that sociality could have evolved via reciprocal altruism. In this way, individuals must be able to recognize each other in order to kind of keep tabs on one another. They also would be interacting long term. So things like primate troops, like what you see in this picture, maybe our ancestors, for example. All sorts of mammals end up being in these long term groups. And then the third condition would have to be retaliation in cases where individuals violate a pact, say injury or death. And this would remove, if it was death especially, this would remove those kind of uncooperative genes from the gene pool, if you will, interestingly. Okay, and so some people have kind of wondered about altruism in humans. You're welcome to pause on this slide and look at this more carefully if you'd like, but just wanted to put this up here to have you think about altruism in fitness. Remember, fitness is an increase in reproductive success, so it's a very specific thing, and I just wanted to note that this part right here, altruists, they do apparently have more sex in humans, so that might mean something to fitness. Eusociality is sort of known as the highest form of social behavior seen in organisms on Earth. You might think that humans are an example of the highest social behavior, but actually we're not. Believe it or not, naked mole rats, and there are a few species of shrimp, tons of species of wasps and bees. These are all examples of organisms who have true eusocial behavior. Eusociality is known as the highest degree of organization of socially living organisms, and it's defined by these three very kind of specific rules. The first one is that there is a reproductive division of labor, or in other words, castes. So there are some individuals who do reproducing, and then there are other individuals who completely sacrifice their life or sacrifice their reproductive ability, and instead do not reproduce directly. Instead, they might be caring for their relatives. So the second part of eusociality is a cooperative care of offspring. The third part is that there's overlapping generations within a nest, within a group. So one theory for the explanation of how eusociality could have evolved is through this very specific reproductive process, sexual process called haplodiploidy. This is a situation where males are haploid and females are diploid. So males are the results of an unfertilized egg, while females are the results of a fertilized egg. In situations like this, sisters, they have the exact same genetic father, and therefore they're actually 3/4 related. And so that barrier to altruistic behavior is lessened. This is sort of what it looks like in a diagrammatic form. Again, the father in this situation is haploid, and the mother is diploid. The drones, so her unfertilized eggs, are males, and those are therefore haploid. Some of those end up being the reproductive males, others are not. The females, though, they're going to get one of these alleles from their mom, but they're going to get the exact same allele from their dad, and that's how they end up being 3/4 related. These sisters, that is. And this might explain this really intense altruistic behavior of giving your own reproductive success up in the form of not being a reproductive individual, as we see in eusocial organisms. But this is actually an outdated theory as the sole explanation as for why eusocial behavior evolved in the first place. Because there are species who are haplodiploid and not eusocial, and there are eusocial species who do not have haplodiploidy. So another theory is to kind of a theory that's alternative to the kin selection theory is this one about how a series of adaptations could just result in eusocial behavior. Or as E.O. Wilson said, genetic relatedness may be a consequence of eusociality rather than a cause of eusociality. So maybe individuals simply formed groups. There was some benefit to them to be in groups. From there, they built defensible fortresses. So these groups were somehow defensible. From there, if offspring did not disperse, could have led to inbreeding. These could be very tight-knit colonies at this point. And then from there, if there was a division of labor by inhibition, potentially by one or more individuals, and then provisioning of larvae, the collective rearing of offspring, this could lead to eusocial behavior without haplodiploidy. And this is actually what we see in termites. That's what the picture is here. This is a bunch of different stages or a bunch of different types of individuals that one would find within a single colony of termites. And this is what their colonies can look like. They can end up forming these massive mounds with hundreds of thousands or millions of individuals. And in this case, actually, this natural selection ends up kind of acting on entire colonies, right? A colony that acts this way will end up rearing more larvae, having more babies, more genes in the next generation than a colony that acts this way. So instead of single individuals being selected for, the entire colony is selected for. And those colonies that have individuals who do not reproduce end up with a more successful colony that is more fit than other such colonies. That's one theory. So we've been talking, or that last slide at least, I was really talking about sort of a different type of natural selection. This whole semester, we've been talking about kind of how selection acts on individuals. But in some ways, it actually could act in multiple levels at the same time. So look at this. This is a figure from your textbook. This is a situation where we have multiple individuals, but they're forming groups. Some of these groups have more selfish individuals. Those are the gray dots here. Other groups have more cooperative individuals. Those are the kind of orangish ones here. Well, let's pull up how those groups are formed in this example here. When there is a selfish individual, it will always do better than a cooperative one. And being cooperative to another individual takes energy, and therefore it will at least decrease your personal direct reproductive success a tiny bit. And so the selfish individuals are the ones who are taking resources. They'll tend to do better, as you can see from this figure. And then looking at those numbers here, what ends up happening is even though there are an equal number of selfish and cooperative individuals in the group to begin with, as you can see kind of up here, the initial frequency, just the fact that there are cooperative groups leads to an increase in the number of cooperative individuals in the next generation. So I want you to kind of study this slide on your own time, pause on this, see how this actually works. This is called Simpson's paradox. And again, this is kind of mentioned in the book. Check that part out. What does this model exactly predict? Kind of think about that. I'm sure that'll come up on a quiz or exam question in the future. Okay, not everything is great about cooperation all the time, though. There is most definitely a conflict of interest here. Individuals still want what's best for themselves, even though they're trying to cooperate with other individuals. It's very apparent when you look at parent-offspring conflicts. So things like this mother bird here trying to feed her 3 open mouths. Well, she still also needs to feed herself. And the longer her offspring are around, the less food she's going to have available to herself. And so there is sort of a conflict here because those offspring of hers might not be ready to make it into the real world on their own yet without the help of resources from their mother or both of their parents sometimes. And so there's a clear conflict of interest between the parent and the offspring. They both kind of want what's best for themselves and each other. And sometimes that can come at a direct cost here. Also, you notice this in actual clutch size of birds. If a bird lays a large clutch size, many eggs, well, then the potential for each egg, each chick, to be a good quality offspring is lower potentially than having a nest with very few eggs, which could lead to potentially higher quality offspring. So there's always this conflict of interest. Oh, as seen in this picture as well. Kind of the longer those offspring are around for mammals, the more milk the mammalian mother has to produce. And eventually she kind of needs to go on with her own life, and actually she wants to potentially make more babies on her own. So there is a conflict of interest here, as those offspring want to hang on as long as they can, getting that easy access milk. You also see issues with cooperation with directly between siblings, and this can result in siblicides sometimes. What they're doing is what's best for themselves. They're trying to get enough food so that they can grow up and have babies themselves. Now, they do want what's best for their sibling because, of course, they share half of their genes, and so, in a way, like in that selfish way, they want what's best for their sibling, but they will not cooperate with their sibling if their sibling is competing for resources. We also see this in plants. Parent-offspring conflict, say when you see a seed pod. The larger those seeds get, say the longer they're attached to their mother plant, the seed pod itself, sort of that exterior wall there, the more they're going to be taking from the parent plant. While that parent plant might already be sort of in the next part of its life cycle, trying to make more fruits. So sometimes plants are able to selectively abort seeds. Even though they've been fertilized, they realize actually they do not have enough resources for these. And selective seed abortion, selective fruit abortion is also very common in the plant kingdom. Also, in a way, siblicide happens. Seeds may want to prevent rival fertilization, those siblings, from being fertilized, so that they can get as many resources as possible from that fruit wall. More issues with cooperation has to do, but kind of back to the mammalian situation, has to do with mammalian maternal-fetal cooperation and or conflict of interest. Here we have two genotypes. Cooperating, yes. Conflicting a bit, too. Fetuses are very invasive on the mother. They're literally a foreign body. They're sending hormones to the body, or to the mother. The mother is sending hormones back to the fetus, these signaling molecules. In fact, even cells of the fetus end up inside of the mother, and direct cells of the mother end up inside of the fetus. This means that the mother can end up with cells that are a different genotype residing inside of her body. And this actually can have some negative side effects from time to time. If those cells end up in the wrong place, say on an organ, and they end up dividing, they can lead to some potential diseases, including autoimmune diseases, is what some of the new research is showing. Well, when you have cells from one genotype entering the body of an individual that has a different genotype, this is a biological phenomenon called microchimerism. Microchimerism, micro small. Chimerism is sort of when you've got these two organisms in one, and that's literally what's happening here. The next slide is another example of something sort of like microchimerism, but we call it germline parasitism in this example. We have cooperation, which in this specific example, the cooperation is the fusion of these two colonies. This is one species, but two different individuals, two colonies, where they fuse. And this is cooperative because they're able to share resources. However, what can end up happening is, say this is colony A, and then this one is colony B over here. Let's just say cells from colony A can invade the body of colony B, and they can actually directly go into the gonads of genotype B. So you can end up having the reproductive gametes of a different genotype A, even though you're the body of genotype B. So this is called germline parasitism. It's seen here in these tunicates and other sessile ocean creatures. And it's funny because it starts with cooperation, but it leads to parasitism. So it ends up with this kind of selfish behavior. All right, that's all for now. I'll see you next time.